Okay. Alrighty, ladies and gents. Welcome to our Titanic 110th anniversary live stream. So I'm super pumped. I think it's gonna be a interesting, exciting night. It's gonna be long, yeah. Basically, what we're gonna be doing tonight is we're gonna be going through the Titanic sinking in real time. So I've chatted with the guys. I've chatted with James Penka over at Titanic Honor and Glory. I've gotten their permission to use their incredible, their amazing animation here. So if you guys are unfamiliar with this, it's basically an animation in real time of the sinking. So it's going to be 3 hours. Almost, I think, yeah, 2 hours and 40 minutes is how long the video is. So I'm very excited. Welcome to you guys here on YouTube. I'm streaming as well on TikTok. For those of you watching here on TikTok, I'm going to be starting the stream very, very shortly. If you are on TikTok, you'll probably get a better view and a better experience on YouTube. So head on over to my YouTube page. You guys can see it in, big screen. Here on TikTok, it's a little small. So I am going to be starting this in a little bit. I just want to make sure that everything is working well. Okay, bear with me for a second here, guys. Okay, I think this is working well. Oh, whoops. Visibility, I definitely need it public in order for people to actually see it. So. Okay, so now we are public. The stream here on YouTube should be live. So I'm just going to wait for a few people to come in. For those of you on TikTok, what's up? We're going to be going through the entire sinking in real time for the next 3 hours. So buckle in, guys. If you're on TikTok, I suggest you guys come over to YouTube because it'll be a better experience. What's up, everybody? I do see you guys here on YouTube. I was streaming for like 2 minutes, not realizing that it was private, so you guys nobody could see. What's up, everybody? It is the 110th anniversary of the sinking, so we are going to be looking at the real-time Titanic sinking animation by Titanic Honor and Glory. What's up, Victor? What's up, Brisk? What's up, Ice Cream Ruler? So for those of you just joining me on YouTube, I've chatted with the guys at Titanic Honor and Glory. I've got their permission to use the real-time animation. So big shout out to them. If you guys want to download the demo where you can explore the Titanic yourself, I'm sure you guys have seen videos on YouTube. They're all over the place. This video is incredible. So if you guys want to download that, you can do that at titanichg.com. So huge shout out to the team at Titanic Honor and Glory. Yeah. What do you guys say? We should get started soon, huh? So here it is 11:32 p.m. local time. I'm in Toronto, so this is New York time. So I'm going to start the animation now, and we are going to experience the entire sinking in real time. So are you guys ready to go? Should we go? I'm just going to be adding in my commentary here and there. And yeah, we're just going to take it easy. I didn't really plan anything. As the timestamps come up, we'll just go with it. Okay? Everybody, here we go. Titanic 110 anniversary live stream. Give me one sec. Okay, here we go. So right now it is around 11:40 p.m. April 14th, 1912. And shortly we're going to see the lookout, Frederick Fleet, spots the iceberg and immediately rings the 3 bells. So as we can see, the iceberg is now approaching.
Hold the port! On port, mate! Helm's all over, sir. Helm hard a port, sir. Close the emergency doors. Close the emergency doors. Ring the warning bell first. And the target to the lock. Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's take a look at what just happened there. I kept my mouth shut because the audio here is really, really good. So basically at 11:40, Frederick Fleet spots the iceberg, and around the same time, First Officer Murdoch sees the iceberg. We assume that he sees the iceberg at the same time because Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, both of the lookouts that were there on the Crow's Nest, they reported that the Titanic pretty much started turning as they were making the call. So it's most of us believe that First Officer Murdoch must have seen the iceberg at around the same time, if not before. So that's what just happened. Titanic just collided with the iceberg. So when the collision happened, First Officer Murdoch immediately ordered the watertight doors to be closed, and you would have heard that here in the audio. He says, ring the bell and then close the watertight door. So all of this happens very, very quickly. Now, you'll notice that First Officer Murdoch, he said hard to starboard. So a lot of people have always asked, okay, if he said hard to starboard, why is it the Titanic started turning port? And, some people have claimed wrongly that Titanic was accidentally turned the wrong way, that there was confusion with the orders, but that's not the case. They were using tiller commands. So long story short, basically, whenever, you wanted to turn the ship to port or to the left, you would still issue the command to the opposite order. So if you wanted to turn left, you would say hard to starboard, which meant hard to turn right, and vice versa. So what you hear there is a hard to starboard order given by First Officer Murdoch, and Quartermaster Hitchens, being a very experienced seaman, he would have known immediately what that meant. That meant turn the wheel to the left, turn the wheel to port, and that way Titanic would be turning to port. So at this point, it is now just a few minutes after Titanic hit the iceberg. As you can see, Titanic is slowly coming to a stop. The officers would have ordered the machine, the engines to be completely stopped, and we're going to see shortly that within minutes, Captain E.J. Smith, he felt that something was amiss. He is a very, very experienced captain as well, so he felt that something was off with the ship. So within minutes of the collision, Captain Smith goes to the bridge and he asks First Officer Murdoch, what was that? What did I feel? What is going on? And obviously immediately he's updated by First Officer Murdoch, and very, very quickly he orders his crew members to go and sound the ship, to do an investigation, to figure out what is the extent of the damage, what is happening with the ship right now. So what you're seeing on screen is Titanic slowly coming to a stop. Yo, what's up, everybody in the chat? I see you guys. I'm going to try to get to you guys as much as possible throughout the night. There's a lot to say for every single one of these moments, so sometimes I'll go off on a tangent. What's up, Asher? What's up, Ashley, Harris, Kaylee? I see you guys. For those of you on TikTok, come on over to my YouTube page. You'll get a much better view because I'm sharing the screen here. So as you can see here, Titanic is now slowly coming to a stop. There's a lot of activity happening at the bridge. They're trying to figure out what is happening. Is there any damage? Where is the ship damaged? And the clock is basically ticking at this point without them knowing right now, but the clock started ticking. Here we get some timestamps. So for those of you on TikTok, this says 11:45, Titanic has stopped as damage inspections are carried out. So at around this time, Captain Smith is summoning some of his officers. Fourth Officer Boxall, he is one of the officers who's tasked with figuring out what is going on. There's also the carpenter of the ship. Captain Smith himself ends up going down to investigate. I believe twice he goes down. So he was pretty busy during this time. Thomas Andrews, for those of you who don't know, Thomas Andrews is basically the architect, the lead, the head designer. He knows Titanic inside and out. He helped design Titanic. So he is awake at this point and he felt something amiss, right? He knew that something was off. So he immediately makes his way over to the bridge and he assists in figuring out what is going on. So what you're going to be seeing right now on screen, you could tell that it's hard to tell actually that anything is going wrong besides the fact that Titanic is now slowing down. And that's one of the main things that passengers will slowly start to notice. Many of them were not awake during the collision. Many of them were asleep, but people do start to notice when the engine stopped. If you remember, here's a marker. 11:47, Captain Smith orders engines to half ahead. So at this point, Captain Smith tried to restart the engines, and you may see it here in the video. It starts to go forward a little bit, but then eventually he's going to stop that, and then Titanic's engines will come to a stop for the very last time. So, as I was saying, at this point, nobody really knows what's going on. Some passengers felt something. Definitely people are noticing that the engines have stopped, right? And that's one of the main things that people really became hyper aware of, because if you think about it, for the last 4 days, passengers have gotten used to the humming of the engines, right? Just a normal hum. It's kind of like when you're in an airplane and you just get used to the humming of the airplane engines. Now imagine if you are in an airplane and all of a sudden everything goes quiet. You would get a little bit nervous. You would definitely notice that. So that's what a lot of passengers noticed right away, and that's probably the first thing that they noticed, that Titanic had stopped, and the normal humming, the buzzing of the engines that they had been used to for the last 4 days, that has stopped, right? Now, keep in mind that at this point, not a single person, there's no way that a single person would have had any idea that Titanic would have sank at this point. Nobody at this point thinks the Titanic sank. Even the officers, Thomas Andrews, Captain Smith, they know that there was a collision, and right now they're just trying to assess the damage. Very quickly, many of the workers down, like for example, the post office workers, they do notice that there's some flooding, and Titanic is flooding rather quickly. There were a couple of workers that were on the forecastle. So that is the very forward section of the Titanic, and if you open one of the hatches, you could look all the way down. So there's a report that some of these workers, they looked inside of that hatch and they could hear the water and they could see it coming in as well. So it was very obvious that there was some sort of water coming into Titanic, but nobody knew the extent of the damage thus far, right? So people are just trying to figure out what is happening. Most passengers, they don't realize anything. So here we go. Here's another timestamp, 11:49. Over 1 million gallons of seawater have already entered the ship. So as I was saying, there's obviously a lot of water that is coming in, but Titanic's officers, the rest of the crew, they're just trying to figure out whether this is something that is minor or whether this is something that should be taken a little bit more seriously. Obviously, as we're going to see, it quickly becomes apparent that the situation is a lot more dire than many believed, right? Let me take a moment to say hi to you guys in the chat. Greetings from Pennsylvania. What's up, Pennsylvania? It's on the film A Night to Remember, The Californian. Hey from Chicago. TikToks keep stopping and loading for me. Yeah, if you guys are here from TikTok or if you guys are on TikTok, come on over to YouTube. You guys will have a much better experience on there, I promise you. So if you guys are just joining the live stream, what we're looking at is a real-time sinking animation of the Titanic, right? So the iceberg collided, or Titanic collided with the iceberg just 10 minutes ago, and already there's a lot of seawater coming into the ship. And at this point, the crew is just trying to figure out what is going on, where is Titanic damaged, and what to do next, whether they can actually proceed forward or whether this is more serious. So it is now around 11:50 p.m. Titanic time. And as you guys can see, there's no noticeable list at this point, even though there is a lot of water rushing into Titanic. And one of the problems with what we just saw with the actual collision was the fact that because First Officer Murdoch, in his attempt to miss the iceberg, what he ended up doing is inadvertently he damaged the ship along a longer stretch of the ship, right? So in his evasive maneuver, he actually had the iceberg graze along the side of the ship, opening up certain areas down around a 300-foot length, right? It wasn't a 300-foot gash that was opened. It was rather a series of small openings, but unfortunately, those small openings were along pretty much 300 feet. So what ended up happening is that exposed 6 of Titanic's watertight compartments. 5 compartments were fully exposed, and there was damage a little bit into the 6th compartment, boiler room number 5. And unfortunately, that, without knowing, that was the death blow to Titanic, right? Now, this is always interesting because at this point, many people always ask the question, would Titanic have been better off smashing into the iceberg head on? And it's always a spirited discussion when we talk about this. I've done a YouTube video about this, whether Titanic would have been better off hitting it and whether Titanic could have stayed afloat. Now, here's my thoughts on whether it would have been better to hit the iceberg head on. Is it possible for Titanic to have stayed afloat? I think it may have been possible. You need to remember that if Titanic had hit the iceberg in a dead-on collision, there would have been significant amount of damage, obviously at the bow. There would have been a lot of casualties because many of the third-class men were berthed in the forward sections of the ship. Also, a lot of the crew, stokers. So there definitely would have been casualties if Murdoch had decided to smash Titanic directly into the iceberg. And you also have to remember that there would have been significant structural damage as well. So we can't even guarantee whether the ship would have stayed afloat. Now, what I always ask is this situation even plausible? Is this a probable thing that could have happened? And at that point, that's when I always say, no, there is absolutely no way that this is even a conceivable scenario. And I'm going to tell you why. Never in a million years would First Officer Murdoch had given the order to smash straight into an iceberg. You got to think about it. Put yourself in his shoes. He's got a couple of seconds to figure out what he wants to do. No trained officer, no seaman, nobody is going to intentionally ram their brand new ship into an inanimate object, a mountain of ice in the middle of the North Atlantic with 2,200 people on board, and it's a brand new ship. There's absolutely no way that thought would have crossed First Officer Murdoch's mind. That's why whenever I hear this debate, it's not really a debate. It's just not something that's even in the realm of reality. So, could Titanic have stayed afloat? It's possible, but is this even a probable scenario? It is not. Okay, so for those on TikTok, 11:56, all engines are ordered to stop. This is the last time her engines would function. So now at this point, Titanic's engines come to a stop for the last time. Now, what you're going to see shortly, and I'm sure that the animation is going to cover it, is as soon as the engines stop, there's a problem. If you think about the technology, the way that steam-operated ocean liners worked is everything works off of steam. That's why the Titanic had boilers, right? The boilers essentially heated up the water, boiled the water, and that created steam. The steam then is sort of like the lifeblood that powers everything in the ship. Now that the engines have been stopped, there's all this excess steam that is just there in the engines. You can now tell that the animation went very, very quiet. So there's all this excess steam, and there is all this frigid water that is coming into the ship. So the fear that the crew on Titanic had was that you have these superheated boilers, and then you have this very, very cold water. The fear was that there would be an explosion because that had happened in the past, right? That was a very real risk. So in order to mitigate that risk, what they ended up doing was they needed to release all of that steam so it wouldn't, because it was essentially like almost like a pipe bomb, right? There's all this pressure of steam and then the water coming in. So you're going to see very shortly that in order to get rid of all of that excess steam in the engines down there, that has to be vented out through the funnels. That's why, if you guys recall the movie, when they're getting all of the lifeboats prepared and everything, you hear, there's all this steam that's coming out of the funnels, and that's because they were getting rid of that excess steam. And that actually ends up going on for nearly an hour. I'm sure that they're going to talk about it here, but yeah, it would have been very, very noisy. It would have been super annoying for the people down there, especially for the officers who were preparing the lifeboats, because they couldn't even hear themselves. There were a lot of reports that they were trying to scream at each other, trying to give each other orders and everything, trying to communicate, and they wouldn't be able to hear anything over that steam escaping from the funnels. Here it is, 11:59. Titanic coasts to her final stop. So, we are now almost at midnight. So Titanic collided with an iceberg 20 minutes ago. So if you guys have been here with me since the very beginning, that was not a lot of time. Like 20 minutes just went by very, very quickly. And in those 20 minutes, there is a lot that is happening. I want you guys to notice that first. Oh, here it is. This is exactly what I was explaining. So boiler pressure and excess steam is vented to prevent boilers from exploding in contact with the cold incoming sea. So I believe the animation is going to stay here for a little while. And I want you guys to notice that that fourth bottom row of portholes, because over the next 10 minutes or so, you're going to see that dip into the ocean. And it's pretty crazy how quickly Titanic actually starts sinking. Although Titanic does stay sturdy and stable for a long time, which is one of the big reasons why people didn't really believe that Titanic was sinking. Here it is, midnight. It is now past midnight, Monday, April 15th, 1912. So, guys, at around midnight, at around this time, Captain E.J. Smith, he was a very proactive captain. Oh, here it is. The order is given to prepare the lifeboats, wake the passengers, and summon the crew. So, as I was explaining, at around this time at midnight, Captain Smith, he didn't want to take any chances. So he told the crew to start preparing the lifeboats. He called all hands on deck, and he ordered all passengers to be awoken, just as a precaution. Keep in mind that he still didn't know whether Titanic was mortally wounded, but he didn't want to waste any time later on in the evacuation. Later on in the night, if there was an evacuation needed, he didn't want his crew fumbling and prepping the lifeboats. So he took proactive action in order to be prepared. So at this point, the order is given to start getting the lifeboats uncovered, getting them swung out in case that an evacuation would be needed, right? So I know over the years that Captain Smith sometimes gets a lot of flack for at least how he's portrayed in the movie. You know, in the movie they show him as somebody who's just kind of like, I don't know what's going on. He seems sort of spaced out, but the real Captain E.J. Smith was very much not spaced out. He was communicating with his officers. He himself went down to inspect the ship twice. He was very involved, and he took all of these proactive safety measures. And it's probably because of his swift, proactive actions that so many people were saved, and so many lifeboats were able to be launched. Remember, 18 out of the 12 lifeboats were launched, which is pretty incredible. If you look at other sinkings later on, like the Lusitania, like the Britannic, in those sinkings, in those scenarios, not all the lifeboats were able to be launched, even though those ships had way more than enough lifeboats for everybody aboard. So you really do got to give Captain Smith some credit. So if you guys notice down there, the last row of portholes, it's slowly going to start dipping into the ocean. And at this point, keep in mind that Captain Smith, Thomas Andrews, they're going back and forth trying to inspect different areas of the ship. Thomas Andrews is now starting to get concerned at all of the areas that have actually been affected. Other crew members stationed below, they're reporting that, areas that are further aft than the bow are sinking. They are flooding. So this is very concerning because Thomas Andrews knows that the Titanic can stay afloat with the first 4 compartments and other compartments breached in varying variations, right? But he knows that if there are 5 compartments or 6 compartments in this case, there is absolutely no hope that Titanic can stay afloat. So right now, they're just trying to, he's just trying to do some calculations and really be sure that Titanic is in fact mortally wounded. Let me take a look at the comments here, guys. What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me tonight on our live stream to commemorate the 110th anniversary of the sinking. I'm so happy you guys are here with me. This is something that I probably would have been doing by myself anyway, but it's nice to do it with you guys. That way we can just chat about what would have been happening during the sinking. Raph, what's your opinion on the sinking of the Britannic? I've had my Britannic phase. Titanic Honor and Glory also does a really good animation of the sinking of the Britannic, so if you guys are interested in the Britannic, definitely go and check out Titanic Honor and Glory's video. And guys, if you're just joining me here on the stream, Titanic Honor and Glory has graciously allowed me to use their real-time sinking animation, which is what we're looking at. So thank you to Titanic Honor and Glory. Their team is amazing. If you guys don't know what the Titanic Honor and Glory project is, they're basically creating a game. And they're recreating the Titanic in the most unbelievable way possible. And you guys can actually download a demo and explore the insides of the Titanic yourselves. I've included a link here. You can see it on the live stream. You guys can download the demo at www.titanichg.com. So I have to give them a shout out. They're allowing me to use their real-time animation, so definitely go check them out if you guys don't know who they are. Now, guys, I want to point your attention to that last row of portholes that I talked about 5 minutes ago. Notice how those portholes are now touching the water, right? So even though it looks like Titanic is quite sturdy, it looks very steady, we're noticing now that the ship is slowly sinking. The bow is slowly dipping. Here we have another timestamp. 12:06. The first class lounge is open for passengers and has designated the assembly point for the start of the evacuation. Zelda Bell is asking me what I'm drinking. Guys, I'm just having a little bit of scotch while I chat with you guys while we watch the sinking unfold. So, yeah, I'm just going to be having a little bit of scotch. I got some Coke Zero. Yeah, I got some water because I'm going to be speaking for the next 2.5 hours. So. So, what is happening at this point? As you can see, it is now around 12:06, 12:07 a.m. on April 15th, 1912. It's almost been half an hour since Titanic collided with an iceberg. And it's half an hour since water has started pouring into the Titanic. If you guys can hear the audio, you'll be able to hear that constant humming, and that is of the excess steam being vented out through the first 3 funnels, as you can see in the animation here. Now, at this point in the night, passengers are being awakened. Third class, second class, first class, everybody is slowly being awakened. Nobody knows that there's anything wrong at this point. People are just told to put on their life jackets and to just hang around. There are many different eyewitness accounts. People saying that, they were told to just wait. Other people were told to go into different meeting areas. Other first class passengers started going out into the hall, started going out into the grand staircase, and started just gathering there, just talking amicably with their other fellow shipmates. Nobody really knows what's going on. In fact, people are a little bit excited. It's been a fairly uneventful trip thus far, so people are finally getting a little bit of action. So there's a little bit of excitement in the air, a little bit of anxiousness, but overall, nobody thinks that anything is wrong. At this point, there are also rumors going around the ship that either the ship dropped a propeller blade or that the ship collided with an iceberg, because there were some eyewitnesses and rumors quickly started swirling. So people started coming up with their own stories. Many people thought that they had collided with an iceberg, but that they had just stopped in order to, investigate what was happening. So at this point, people just think that this is all normal. They're just taking safety precautions, and that they're going to get a little bit of excitement that night, and then they're going to go to bed and wake up, and things are going to be good. Yeah, so Sam here in the chat has pointed out that that last row of portholes that I had just spoken about a few minutes ago, if you guys notice, it is gone. It is underneath the water, so it really gives you some perspective as to how quickly the ship is actually sinking. Only the most noticeable passengers at this point would feel that there is some sort of list. But the one thing with this animation, guys, is if you do a fast forward in this angle right here, you will see how the bow starts dipping into the water. It's pretty interesting and a little frightening, seeing such a majestic, beautiful, glowing ship just slowly dipping into the water without anybody realizing thus far. So, I think that around this point it must be 12:10. So, you're going to see that the captain will go to the wireless room. He will tell Harold Bride and Jack Phillips to stand by in case they need to send out any distress signals. Right now, they're just getting final confirmation as to the extent of the damage. But he's telling the wireless operators to stand by, just in case they need to actually send a distress signal. But it's not at that point quite yet. Now, the one thing that I do want to address now is, for us looking at this animation, it's very easy for us to go and ask the question, well, why didn't they start loading the lifeboats right now? What are they doing? What are they wasting so much time on? But the thing is, we have hindsight, guys. So we know the timelines very, very well. We know the Titanic sinks at 2:20 a.m. So we know when the timer starts. They didn't know that. They're just living through everything in the moment. And the captain has to be absolutely sure the Titanic is mortally wounded or that there is significant risk to his passengers before he orders a full-scale evacuation. For several different reasons. Number one, it's very, very dangerous for people to be put into wooden rafts, to be lowered into the ocean in the middle of the night. Like, that is not a very light decision to be taken lightly. So the captain needs to be 1,000,000,000% sure that that is the right decision before he puts his passengers at risk, right? He's not going to go and start putting passengers into lifeboats unless it's absolutely necessary. The other thing is that it's so hard to communicate with everybody on the ship at this point. There's no PA system, right? So even if the captain decides something, he issues an order, it takes a little bit of time for that order to be communicated out, right? So at this point, Captain Smith, Thomas Andrews, they're getting final confirmation that Titanic is indeed mortally wounded before they actually start evacuating. But the good thing is that Captain Smith actually ordered the lifeboats to be prepared. If you guys were with me 10 minutes ago, the crew is preparing the lifeboats just in case as a precaution, right? So I don't know if in this animation they show it, but we should be able to see the lifeboats slowly swinging out. They're all being uncovered right now, and the crew is busy working away. Kuksana is now pointing out that the third row of portholes is almost underwater. You are absolutely right. So guys, take a look at that third row. Take a look at that third row. It's almost going underwater. And this has been 10 minutes since we last saw the fourth row. So Titanic is definitely settling in. It's definitely settling into the water at this point. And Kayla is correct in pointing out that bow is lifted. Oh, you meant the stern is lifting slightly. Absolutely, you can tell that the stern is slowly starting to go up and the bow is slowly going down. Oops. Sorry guys, I'm like dropping crap over here. Okay, as Titanic settles in, let me take a look at the chat here. What's up, QWERTY? What's up, Finn? Thank you guys for joining me so much. I'm glad that we can spend some time together here on the 110th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. Elena asks a question, why doesn't the fourth funnel have any steam? That is a fantastic question. The reason why the fourth funnel doesn't have any steam is that it wasn't a real quote-unquote funnel. It was just an extra funnel. It's not actually connected to any of the exhaust from the boilers, so it's not a real funnel, so to speak. 12:15. So John Phillips, aka Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, the two wireless telegraph operators were put on standby and told to prepare to call for help. So this is what I just mentioned a few minutes ago. At this point, Captain Smith is trying to be proactive, and he is now told the two wireless operators to be on standby and be ready to signal for help, to send out Titanic's distress signal and to send out the CQD. They would have been sending out a CQD. So you guys can see here that the third row, watch the third row down there. We can barely even see those forward portholes, and they're about to disappear here. It's interesting to put this into perspective, guys, because I've been sitting here chatting with you guys for, what has it been, 35 minutes, 40 minutes or so? That time flew by, to be honest. It flew by. Things happened very quickly. So here it says 12:16. So at around 12:15, the orchestra begins playing. Now, in the movie, we see that the orchestra is playing in the lounge at the beginning, and then they end up moving to the outside of the first class entrance. Now, there's been a lot of chat, a lot of discussions as to where the orchestra would have been that night. And the general consensus by most Titanic historians, and by what we see here in our Titanic Bible on a sea of glass, is that the orchestra itself, they were not where they were portrayed in James Cameron's movie. It would not have been practical. They were most likely right inside of that first class entrance. So they weren't playing outside, they were playing right inside because that was the location of the piano. It would have made sense for the orchestra to be playing with their pianist, and there was a piano right there. So just a little while ago, just a few seconds ago actually, we saw that Titanic is now starting to take on a slight list to the starboard side. Super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat here. Burning Paradise. If you know, how cold was the water that night approximately? Love the content, learning so much. Thank you so much, Burning Paradise. I really appreciate it. So, according to what On a Sea of Glass says and many other Titanic resources, I believe the water was around 28 degrees Fahrenheit. So that translates into -1, -2 degrees Celsius. Give or take a couple of degrees. Either way, it would have been really, really cold. Like, you would not have wanted to be in the water. If you actually go to some of the Titanic museums, you will see that some of the museums, they actually have, a little thing, a recipient of water where you can stick your hand in there, and that'll be approximately the temperature of the water that night, and it's pretty cold. Another super chat, Alex Keaton, thank you so much. Thanks for the TikToks. Thank you. I appreciate you guys. I make the TikToks and I make the content because this is something that I've been talking about forever, and it's amazing to see our community that we built and that there's other people that are interested in the same thing as me. So I love making the content for you guys. Thank you for being here with me on the 110th anniversary. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, honestly. Yeah, so let's take a look at the bow. Guys, look, it is now significantly lower. it's crazy to see an animation like this because you realize Titanic is sinking very, very quickly. Titanic sinks very quickly, and now if you look to the stern of the ship, you can see a little bit of the propeller. Do you guys notice that? And so we can definitely see the progress over the last 10 minutes. There's now only 2 rows of portholes showing at the bow. Titanic is sinking very quickly. So in a few minutes, guys, you're going to see a timestamp coming up in the animation where Thomas Andrews confirms with Captain E.J. Smith, I believe it's at around 12:25, that Titanic is indeed sinking and that Titanic has around an hour to an hour and a half left. So at this time, Thomas Andrews is doing his final calculations. Captain Smith, at this point, he's gone down to inspect the ship himself for twice. And Thomas Andrews is coming to the gut-wrenching realization that his pride and joy, his greatest achievement, is now going to end up on the bottom of the ocean floor. And it's going to come as a shock to him. But he's going to communicate that message in a private conversation with Captain E.J. Smith. It's not at all like how you saw it in the movie. I know that in the James Cameron movie, you see that there's this big meeting. Thomas Andrews calls everybody together. All the officers are there. Captain Smith is there. Bruce Ismay's there. What would have probably happened is Thomas Andrews and Captain Smith, they would have had a meeting privately in the bridge or in maybe the chart room by the bridge, and that's where they would have had that conversation. Okay, so time check. For those of you just joining the live stream, it is now approximately 12:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912. It has been around 40 minutes since Titanic collided with the iceberg, and Titanic is definitely sinking, as you can see in the animation. The bow keeps on lowering and lowering, and at this point, keep in mind, guys, that the evacuation hasn't been ordered. Here it is. Okay, here we go. So at 12:22, Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer who is on board, confirms the damage is too much for Titanic to survive. He estimates 1 to 2 hours before Titanic sinks. So it would have happened at around this time, probably close to, between 12:20 and 12:25. That's when Thomas Andrews confirms 100%. It's just impossible for Titanic to stay afloat based on the damage. So that is a huge realization for the captain, for everybody present in that meeting, if there was anyone present. This is huge. Titanic is going to end up at the bottom of the ocean floor. So very quickly, after Thomas Andrews confirms this to Captain Smith, he immediately orders the evacuation, and we're going to see that things very quickly pick up. So at this point, he's going to be telling stewards, the rest of the crew, to start calling the passengers up to the boat deck. So now we see that the camera has moved out. We can see the Titanic, even though from our angle, guys, we can see the Titanic is noticeably, listing forward. There is a significant tilt, but it's important to remember that for a lot of the passengers, a lot of the people on Titanic, they probably wouldn't have felt anything. If you were on the boat deck at this point, unless you were very, very observant, you may not notice that the ship is tilting that much. We can see that very clearly because the angle that we're viewing it at is pretty far away, but for those on board the ship, things wouldn't have really seemed all that off. Let me get to another super chat. Kevin's the man, 112. Thank you so much for the super chat, Kevin. If you had the chance, would you dive to the wreck? Dude, if I had the chance, if I had $120,000, I would be down in the wreck. guys, for those of you that don't know, there's a company called Ocean Gate Expeditions, and they have been taking civilians down to the wreck to help with their expeditions. Like, I believe that the mission is to help chart the debris field, but they've been taking people. If you pay like a measly $120,000, they will take you down to the wreck. So yeah, man, Kevin, dude, if I had 120,000, I'd be down at the wreck. I think it'd be an incredible experience. Question in the chat, CC, yes, when does the band start playing? So the band started playing around 10 minutes ago. They would have been playing in the lounge right now. But interestingly enough, when the order comes in to actually evacuate the ship, at this point, it's believed that the band put down their instruments. This is not something that we see in the movie, but it's believed that the band puts down their instruments. They they go back to their cabins. They don their life jackets, and then they end up moving to the first class entrance by the grand staircase. So here it is, 12:25. The first distress signals are sent out. CQD is now being sent out, and it is a very, very famous message, guys. It goes CQD, 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 CQD. Let me just refer to my book here to see exactly what the message was. I believe it was just that CQD message sent out by Jack Phillips. Also, for those of you who don't know what I'm looking at, this is the book On a Sea of Glass. I made a YouTube video about it, probably the standard in Titanic books. This is like the end-all, be-all for Titanic books. If you guys really want to get into the nitty-gritty, look at the details, look at the very exact timeline, definitely recommend this book. It's called On a Sea of Glass. Here it is. I'm going to read you a passage. So it says, at 12:27 a.m., according to Titanic's clocks, Jack Phillips began tapping out the fateful message. It was the international call for distress in the wireless call letters assigned to Titanic, and the simple message that Phillips sent out would soon become famous. CQD, 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 MGY. And the MGY is basically whenever a message was sent with that MGY, I believe it was called the Master Service or something message. I don't know it off the top of my head, but the MGY basically denoted that that message was to be relayed to the captain of whichever ship received that message. So if you send out a message with an MGY, any ship that hears that message has to relay that to the captain of the ship. Okay, here's a controversial moment here, guys. So 12:27, lights of another ship are spotted on the horizon off the bow. This ship is close enough to help, if Titanic can get its attention. So this is one of the more contentious topics of that night. Was there a ship in the distance, and was that ship the Californian? So very early on in the night, as we can see here, over the last couple of minutes, there were several officers and even passengers that noticed that there was a light in the distance, and it seemed to be the light of another ship, meaning that the ship must have been close enough. However, when Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, when they were calling out for help, there was no answer. That ship was completely mute. There was nowhere to be seen. So you're going to see that shortly, in order to get the attention of the ship, 4th Officer Boxhall retrieves Titanic's distress rockets, and he begins firing these distress rockets in around 10 to 15 minute intervals. So he starts firing them off in the hopes of getting the attention of this mystery ship in the distance. Gaming Techno here is pointing out that, look, yes, the second row of porthole guys is now going. And I also want to point out that the steam is still going off. This has been going for quite a while, and it will still keep on going. As the first lifeboat gets launched at around 12:40, the steam will keep going, and it's not until almost 1 a.m. that the steam finally stops. So it would have been very hectic as people are being brought to the boat deck like they would have been being brought at this point. Because it is now almost 12:30 at night, right? So at this point, you can see, if you guys look at the boat deck, these boats are now uncovered. They're being swung out. Here's another message. 12:30, the SS Mount Temple receives Titanic's distress call and is the first ship to make way for Titanic's position. But the SS Mount Temple was very, very far. Very far. So at around this point at 12:30, they, First Officer Murdoch, on the starboard side of the ship, he would have been trying to gather passengers toward the forward lifeboats and trying to convince people to get into those forward lifeboats. Now, one of the things that's, I think, important to remember is the officers, they really needed to get those forward lifeboats clear as quickly as possible. The officers knew the Titanic was going down by the bow, so it was imperative for them to try to get those forward lifeboats clear of the ship before it was too late. The last thing they would have wanted is for lifeboats to go unlaunched, for lifeboats to, be stuck to the ship as the ship was going down. That was the last thing they wanted. So there was a lot of pressure for First Officer Murdoch on the starboard side of the ship and for Second Officer Lightoller on the port side of the ship to get those forward lifeboats clear of the ship. Naomi Camacho, oh my god, time is going fast, to be honest. You are absolutely right. Time is going by very, very quickly. And remember, guys, this is literally happening in real time. So things move very quickly. Decisions need to have been made very, very quickly. And we really need to commend the captain for taking a lot of those proactive steps. .32, most lifeboats are swung out to prepare for loading. Yes, this is a pretty cool shot. We're getting a nice close-up. Oh, here we go. So the very first lifeboat that you see toward the right of your screen, that's the emergency boat. That's a cutter. That is the boat number 1. The one that's being swung out here is boat number 3. The next one is 5. And then the last one of these series is boat number 7. Also, if you notice, right behind those lifeboats, if you look in front of that first funnel, that is the grand staircase. That great thing there, that is the grand staircase that we famously see get destroyed in the movie. So that is where the dome would be. This is such an incredible shot. I love this. The extreme close-up. So right now we're looking at the starboard side of the ship. Here we see boat number 9, 11, 13, and 15. So on the Titanic, all the lifeboats on the starboard side of the ship, they were odd numbered, and all the boats On the port side of the ship, they were even numbered. If you guys notice here, you can actually see the tilting of the deck. It's becoming quite noticeable at this point. Blade Pfeiffer, so was it a dome or a grate? It was a dome, but there was a grate, there was a covering outside of the dome. So the grand staircase was that grate that you see there, and then inside of that grate was that dome that we know. And that was lit up by lights and also natural light as well. (12:35) 4th Officer Boxhall recalculates Titanic's position based on the stars. The new position is delivered to the wireless room. So that is actually a really good point, because initially, Captain Smith, 4th Officer Boxhall, Captain Smith gives an initial position to the wireless operators. But then at this point, Captain Smith orders 4th Officer Boxhall to recalculate that position, and then he sends that over to Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, and then they start sending out that new recalculated position. And that is a position that the Carpathia will eventually get, and that is a position that they steam to. Here we're taking a look at the final lifeboat on the starboard side. This is lifeboat number 15. Gaming Techno, can we see the stern? You are going to see the stern very shortly, my friend. Yeah, I'm not the one controlling the animation. The animation is just the video. So. So what we're looking at here, that's actually the second class entrance. The stern of the ship, a lot of this was second class areas. So at the top over there, that would have been the second class entrance. It would have, when you walk in through those doors over on the left, it would have taken you down this big passageway, taking you down to the second class areas. So now we're looking at the port side lifeboats. 12:37, RMS Carpathia responds to Titanic's distress calls and reports them to her bridge. Okay, guys, so this is a very important moment in the whole Titanic saga, because this right here was crucial. If the wireless operator of the Carpathia, if he had not received the signal and taking it seriously, there's no telling whether there would be any survivors at all today. And what happened was the following. So the wireless operator of the Carpathia, his name was Harold Cottam, okay? And he was pretty much, wrapping up, getting ready to call it a night, similar to the wireless operator of the Californian, except he actually went to bed. So Harold Cottam, he was just listening in on his receiver, and that's when he happened to hear the distress signal. So as soon as he heard the CQD, he tuned in, and he was like, okay, well, what is this? And he listened, and he realized that it was a Titanic. So he started communicating back, and he got all that information, and as soon as he confirmed the Titanic was sinking, Harold Cottam immediately sprung to action, and he went and woke up Captain Arthur Rostron of the Carpathia. Now, that's a pretty bold thing for him to do. Like, to just barge in on the captain, ignoring all the rules of engagement, all the hierarchy that were pretty strict at sea. He just barges into his room, and he pretty much tells him, listen, I just received an urgent signal from the Titanic. They are sinking, they're in distress, they need assistance immediately. Captain Rostron, he looks at Harold Cottam and he says, are you sure? Harold Cottam looks at him and he says, yes. And then Captain Rostron asks him one more time, "Are you absolutely certain?" And Harold Cottam says, "Yes, sir." And with that, Captain Rostron springs into action, calls all hands on deck on the Carpathia, and immediately turns his ship around. They were actually heading in the opposite direction. He turns his ship around and boom, diverts all of his resources and heads to Titanic's position. And none of that would have happened if Harold Cottam, the wireless operator, had not picked up the signal. So, commendable. Both of their actions, incredibly commendable. And the passengers of the Titanic, the survivors, really owed their lives to those two men. And they later commemorated their actions, their heroism with there's a couple of famous images of Margaret Brown giving Captain Rostron a trophy. And then every single member of Carpathia's crew received these cool little medallions. You guys can search it up on Google. It's really interesting. Oh, for those of you asking, guys, those lights there that you see, the red light and the green light, those are just there. It's kind of like if you think of an airplane, you know how there's different colored lights on like the wings of the airplane? It's a similar concept. Just shows people in the distance that it is indeed an ocean liner. So, guys, it is now 12:40 a.m. and lifeboat number 7 on the starboard side of the ship is now the first lifeboat to be launched. And the lifeboat here is launched with around 27 people on board. I missed exactly what the animation said, but it's approximately 27 people, less than half of the lifeboat's capacity. Now let's talk about that a little bit. Because there's obviously a lot of criticism that people give to the officers that night as to why they were even launching lifeboats that were half full. You know what I mean? It's an emergency. They know the Titanic is sinking. Why would they launch any lifeboats half full? Well, even though right now we can see in the animation that clearly Titanic is going down by the head, it still doesn't look all that noticeable when you're on the ship. So a lot of passengers were extremely hesitant with getting into a lifeboat. Because put yourself in their shoes. These ladies, first-class ladies, they are woken in the middle of the night. They're told that it's a lifeboat drill. They're told that it's a precaution. They're not exactly sure the Titanic is sinking. Nobody believes the Titanic is going to sink. There's no clear communication as to what is actually happening. So a lot of these women, they're thinking, why am I going to board this rickety, dingy, wooden lifeboat in the middle of the ocean in the pitch darkness of midnight? Why am I going to go there when Titanic seems so much safer and it's warm and it's sturdy? So it was very difficult to convince people, those initial people to actually get into those lifeboats. And as I mentioned earlier in the stream, the priority for First Officer Murdoch and all the officers in command is to get those first lifeboats as clear from the ship while they still can. So at this point, Murdoch is saying, okay, let's get anybody in here. Gentlemen, if you're willing to go onto the lifeboats to encourage the ladies, please, by all means, get onto the boat. So yeah, around 27. I believe somebody in the chat said 28 people is what the animation said. 28 people in lifeboat number 7. Now, 12:43, lifeboat number 4 is lowered to A deck for loading. The crew cannot open the A deck window, so lifeboat 4 sits idly for a while. Okay, so let me explain a little bit more as to what that even means. So if you guys look toward the bow of the ship, the second lifeboat from the front, that is lifeboat number 4. That's the one that the timestamp was talking about. So while First Officer Murdoch is loading all of the lifeboats on the starboard side, he's actually quite organized. He's got a really good system, and he's handling things very, very well. Now, on the port side of the ship, which is the side that we're looking at here, things are not like that whatsoever. It's a lot more disorganized, and I believe it was Captain Smith that was working with Second Officer Lightoller, and the idea was to, okay, here we have lifeboat number 5 is now launched. So lifeboat number 5 is on the starboard side of the ship. It was launched very quickly after lifeboat number 7. So as I was mentioning, on the starboard side of the ship, things are going very quickly. You know, he launches lifeboat number 7, and immediately afterwards, lifeboat number 5 is launched. Okay, there's a lot happening, guys. Things are really going to pick up. So I'll talk about this door in a little bit, but let me go back to lifeboat number 4. So the initial idea was for the lifeboat to be lowered down to the A-deck promenade because they thought that it would have been easier for passengers to board through the A-deck promenade. However, Second Officer Lightoller, Captain Smith, a lot of them, they forgot that the Titanic was different than her sister ship, the Olympic. Titanic was closed at the front. As you can see the windows there on the A-deck promenade? They're closed at the front. So the problem they ran into is how are they going to load people in there when they don't even have the keys to the windows? So you'll notice that lifeboat number 4, that's going to stay there for almost another hour until they figure out the window situation. So they kind of just forgot about that boat. Now, a minute ago, you would have seen that that door was opened on D-deck. Now that door there, that would have been the main gangway door, the first class entrance. So hold on, here's another timestamp, 12:45. After watertight doors are open to give access for the pump crew. Yeah, so the pumps are now being used to try to contain, the water, slow things down a little bit. But going back to the door on D-deck. So Second Officer Lightoller, while all of the confusion was going on with lifeboat number 4 that we just saw, he ordered around 5 crewmen, it was 5 or 6 crewmen, to go down to the D-deck by the reception and to open those doors. And now the idea was to lower lifeboats and then eventually have passengers board through that D-deck door. Eventually that ends up turning into nothing, and the door actually just stays open for the remainder of the night. And we are going to see the effect that open door has in the sinking in a little bit. Yo, Brent TV, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate you, man. What's up, Titanic Man? What's up, Brent TV? Thanks, guys, for the super chat. I appreciate you. For those of you tuning in on TikTok, what's up? I see you guys. If you guys want to join me here on YouTube, I think you guys will get a much better experience because you'll be able to see the animation a lot more clearly. Danny Fight, is this real time? It is real time. Okay, so it is now 12:47. Officer Boxhall launches the first distress rockets in an attempt to signal to the ship on the horizon. Now, I want you guys to notice the color of those rockets there because I did see a question in the chat talking about whether it was white rockets, whether it was different colored rockets. And the prevailing thought within the Titanic community for many years was that Titanic just shot off white rockets, right? And a lot of that was based off of eyewitness accounts or many eyewitnesses that report seeing white rockets. And that even gave way to a theory that the Californian did not come to Titanic's aid because they were shooting off white rockets, which were the wrong color. Now, that is actually not quite true. So first of all, there was no wrong or right color back then. There was no regulation that stated that rockets needed to be either white or red or green. There was nothing set in stone. What Fourth Officer Boxhall, 2 quartermasters on the poop deck. Oh yeah, okay, so this timestamp basically says that Quartermaster Rowe, who was stationed at the poop deck, which is at the stern, they were not aware of the situation, so they call up to the bridge saying, hey, listen, there's some lifeboats in the water. Were you guys aware? And they're like, yes, come. So they actually end up bringing those rockets that Fourth Officer Boxhall is now shooting off. Now, back to the rocket thing. So there was actually no right or wrong color at the time. Fourth Officer Boxhall did mention that the only thing that was in the regulations that signaled distress was if the rockets were fired off at a consistent rate, which is why you'll see that he fires them off at intervals of like 10 minutes or so in the hopes of getting the attention. Now, the reason why we know the Titanic's rockets were not only white, was actually in 2004, during one of the expeditions, they discovered the rocket canister in the bottom of the ocean. 1249, Carpathia now confirms that it's on its way. Okay, Carpathia is now on its way, guys. So they discovered the rocket canister at the bottom of the ocean, and in these individual canisters, there's actually a little, there's like a slit. It's like cut open at the end. That way you could look into the copperhead and see the color of the rocket that they were about to shoot. And the grand discovery that they made was that when they saw these canisters, they were white, they were red, they were multiple different colors, which is why we know that that night there were rockets of many, many different colors. It was not just white, and we know that for a fact. There we go, guys. So 1250, steam stops venting from the funnel. So it's almost been an hour that the steam is going off, and now finally they're getting a little bit of peace and quiet. One thing that I'll say, guys, is I know that these timestamps, some of you guys may notice that some of them are off and whatnot. And keep in mind that within the Titanic community, we're always trying to gather more information and whatnot. So, you know, timestamps tend to change by a couple of minutes. So don't treat it as like an absolute fact. But that's why you depending on which book you read or where you see, some of the timestamps may be a little bit different. Okay, 1250, lifeboat number 9 is lowered to A deck by Chief Officer Wilde. You guys can hear that difference now, huh? Things have really gone quiet now that the steam has stopped. Okay, so let's do a recap. Where are we now? It is now 12:50 a.m., 12:51 a.m. It says Second Officer Lightoller officially adopts the women and children only policy. So what is happening on deck at this point? So passengers are being told to go on deck. On the starboard side of the ship, First Officer Murdoch is desperately trying to get anybody into those forward lifeboats. So that was lifeboat number 7, lifeboat number 5, those forward lifeboats. He's trying to get them out as quickly as possible. Now, First Officer Murdoch, his approach was sort of like a pragmatic approach. He's like, I'm just going to get as many people out as possible. If there are no women, gentlemen, you can board the lifeboats. So in fact, many men who survived, they owe their lives to First Officer Murdoch because he went by the rule, women and children first. And if there were no women nearby, then men were allowed to board. Now, as you saw in that timestamp, Second Officer Lightoller on the opposite side, on the port side of the ship, he was a lot more strict, and he said, "Women and children only." There was only one man that Second Officer Lightoller allowed into a lifeboat that night, and he was actually Canadian. He's from my city. He's from Toronto. And I believe they talk about it here in the timestamps, but his name was Major Arthur Puchin, and he boarded lifeboat number 6, which was the same lifeboat as Quartermaster Hitchens, the man who was at the helm, Frederick Fleet, the man who spotted the iceberg, and the famous Margaret Brown, who history knows as the unsinkable Molly Brown. It was that lifeboat where Second Officer Lightoller let the only men on that he would let on that night. Holy crap. Dude, I need a little bit of a break, my voice. Danny Fight is asking, why did he let him in? Well, you're going to see. It'll say in the timestamps in a little bit. I'll get to that story in a little bit, but I will tell you why Second Officer Lightoller let Puchin in. So 12:53, the Strauss couple famously refuses to part each other at lifeboat number 8. Ooh. So what we're looking at here, guys, this is E deck. This is E deck. This is now a first class area of the ship. This is getting very scary because this is now, the water's getting into areas where passengers would be. Passengers are berthed in E-deck. And you can see that the water is going very quickly. None of that Rose rescues Jack stuff. Like, there would have been no time for Rose to rescue Jack if they had been real. Like, look at how quickly the water's rising. Things are happening very quickly at this point. Jeez. It's crazy to see the water level rising up against the wall. It's happening very, very quickly. Look at that. And now we're back on the boat deck. This is now the starboard side of the ship. What you're looking at is boat number 3. So as you can see, lifeboat number 7 would have been the first one on the left. That was the first lifeboat to leave, followed shortly by lifeboat number 5. And this one is lifeboat number 3, and then we still see lifeboat number 1 up ahead. There it is. Lifeboat number 3 is launched with 32 people on board. So, guys, if we put this to perspective, I've been talking to you guys for the last 10 minutes. In the last 10 minutes, we've seen, what, like 4 different lifeboats be launched? So things are happening very, very rapidly, right? As boats are being loaded and launched, the next one is being loaded. A lot of these are happening simultaneously, like at the same time. So things are happening very, very quickly. So keep in mind that at this point, as this boat is being lowered, boat number 1 would have been being loaded. However, there's an interesting story with that lifeboat on the right side. That one is emergency lifeboat number 1. That one would go down in history as the infamous lifeboat that went down that only had 12 passengers. Excuse me. That one was lifeboat number 1. And yeah, you know, if you guys know in the movie when Mr. Andrews goes and says, I saw one boat with only 12. That is the boat that he was looking at. Lifeboat number 1 had only 12 passengers in it. And it was the Duff Gordons that were in the lifeboat. The Duff Gordons were a first-class couple, first-class passengers. It was Lucille Lady Duff Gordon, Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon. And it was basically a lifeboat with the Duff Gordons, their maid, their servant, and a bunch of other stokers, right? Now, this boat would also go down in history as there was a controversy where basically in the press, it got out, there was a rumor that got out that the Duff Gordons paid off to have their own private boat. Now, the actual story goes as follows. It was pretty much Lucy Lady Duff Gordon, she was complaining that she lost some of her beautiful nightgowns that night. And then one of the stokers is like, listen, man, like we stopped being paid. The moment that this ship went down, we don't get paid. We lost everything. We lost our kits, our stoker kits. So in an attempt to be nice and to help them out, okay, so 12:58, the orchestra moves to the grand staircase landing on the boat deck. So as I mentioned before, the actual orchestra was most likely not on the boat deck. They were inside the grand staircase because that's where the piano was. Now, going back to the Duff Gordon event, in an effort to repay the stokers back for all their troubles, Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon promised them that he would give them £5 each for their troubles and so that they could buy themselves new kits and get started. Now, £5 back then, that was a lot of money. That was a lot of money. That's a couple $100, you know what I mean? So when they finally got on the Carpathia, he made true, to that promise. And then because of that exchange of money, word got out, and then some people accused them of bribing those people. So that's a little fun tidbit about boat number 1. what we're looking at here, this is the Turkish baths. Now flooding. And now we go back to the bridge. So I also want to point out, guys, that if you look on the starboard side of the ship, so if we're looking at the screen here, it'd be on the left side. That would be the starboard side from this angle. A lot of those lifeboats are already gone. Now compare that to the port side of the ship, where pretty much all the lifeboats are still there. And that's what I was talking about earlier, that Murdoch really needs to be given a lot of credit because he had a really good system going. He was able to be organized, save a lot of people, and get these lifeboats cleared. While on the port side, there were many people working. Captain Smith was there, Second Officer Lightoller was there, Chief Officer Wild was there, and Sixth Officer Moody. There was all these people, so it may have been that there were, too many cooks in the kitchen, that everything was so unorganized here, because not a single lifeboat has been launched at this point. 3 lifeboats have been launched, and a 4th one quickly being launched on the starboard side, and not a single boat has been launched until now. So 1 a.m., lifeboat number 8 leaves with 27 people on board. Over the course of the night, it rows over 2 miles. Yeah, we got a super chat here. Burning Paradise, huge super chat. Thank you very much, Burning Paradise. I've had nightmares as a kid. I've been trapped in 3rd class while the water was flowing in. I've watched the movie so much on VHS. Burning Paradise, I used to have similar not really nightmares. I've had lots of dreams where I've been on the Titanic. Way too many dreams, so definitely feel you. Melanie here in the chat pointed out the door is open. So yes, I want to point your guys' attention to the door, which we talked about probably 15-20 minutes ago. So this is the gangway D-deck reception door. As I mentioned earlier, Second Officer Lightoller, he ordered that door to be open because he was hoping to have passengers board from that door. It would be an easier descent as opposed to launching the lifeboats from the boat deck. So that was the initial idea. As you can see, things on the port side of the ship, they were not going as organized as he would have hoped. So it's believed that he just forgot about the door, and the door ends up staying open for the remainder of the night, guys. So there's a really cool shot that Titanic Honor and Glory does here in the animation where they pull the camera out so that we can see the angle. And you will see the effect that the water going into that open door has on the Titanic. And you will see the Titanic eventually starts listing significantly to port, because that door there does stay open for the remainder of the night. All right, guys, if you're just joining the live stream here, we're looking at the Titanic Honor and Glory real-time sinking animation. Huge shout out to the team at Titanic Honor and Glory for letting me use their incredible animation. If you guys want to do your own exploration of the ship, you guys can download their demo at titanichg.com. titanichg.com. So, massive shout out to them. So what we're looking at here, this is the grand staircase, guys. This is the bottom floor of the grand staircase. There is water coming up very quickly. Now at this point, look at that water coming in. Yeah, if you had a real life Rose saving Jack situation, there's no way Rose would have made it to Jack on time. Definitely not. Yeah, for those of you in the comments, the animation is amazing. Full credit to Titanic Honor and Glory. I've been a huge fan of their project for a long time. So if you guys don't know what Titanic Honor and Glory is, definitely check out their YouTube page. Check out their website. They're pretty much developing a game where you can go and explore all the interiors of the ship. And this is a really old animation, guys. Even tonight, I know they were doing a live stream. I think the live stream is over now, but there's a new updated animation that they do every single year. And the level of detail that they add is just unbelievable. It's incredible. So we are now back on the starboard side of the ship. As you can see, Murdoch has done a very fine job of clearing most of the forward lifeboats. The only two lifeboats that you see here, the one hanging over the edge, that is the cutter lifeboat, the emergency lifeboat number 1, which is the lifeboat that ends up being launched with only 12 people on board. And just inside of it, you will see Collapsible C, which doesn't get launched until later on in the night, almost an hour later. Ooh, it's getting really hot in this room. Yep, so at this point, Murdoch is having a lot of trouble finding passengers to board the boat. Because if you look toward the left side of your screen, guys, you see that gate? This area here was the officers' promenade, actually. So that was off limits to a lot of the passengers, which is why it was probably hard to get passengers to go through that gate and make their way to this lifeboat, which is why it's only launched with 12 people. They're really having a tough time trying to find people. So there we go. We have lifeboat number 1. And as I mentioned before, really, really good job to First Officer Murdoch for clearing so many lifeboats so quickly, while on the port side, they're not really doing so well. It's a crazy disorganized mess. They've only launched 1 lifeboat on the other side. Here they've launched 4. I'll be right back, guys. I'm just going to fill up my glass a little bit. All right, so if I could point your attention to that lifeboat on the top of the officers' quarters. That is one of the collapsible lifeboats. That is Collapsible A. I gotta be honest, the rocket kind of scared me. Okay, it is now 1:07. Suction pumps are assembled and activated in the flooded areas. So this is something that we saw earlier on in the night as well. The crew down in the boiler rooms, down in the engine rooms, they are staying at their posts. So even a lot of the stokers, a lot of the crew members who were in boiler room 6 and boiler room 5, who saw the water there, all they ended up doing was moving towards other boilers, and they stayed at their posts. It wasn't until later on that they were pretty much released and they were, sent up. But at this point, they're trying their absolute hardest, trying to fight back the sea that is desperately trying to, that is pushing its way into the Titanic. The water's it's going into the Titanic very, very rapidly. And as you see, Titanic is putting up a pretty good fight, actually. Titanic is desperately trying to stay afloat. We see the Titanic remain stable, actually, for a big part of the night. Which it's... you got to give Titanic credit, and you got to give Thomas Andrews and everybody credit, because Titanic was an incredible ship. Oftentimes people say, Titanic was not really a good ship. It was, there's some people that have even said that Titanic had bad metal, had bad iron. It wasn't really good quality. But in fact, the opposite is true. It's because Titanic was such a well-built ship that she was able to last so long. Think of other sinkings later on, like the Lusitania, the Britannic. Obviously, the damage was different, But a lot of these ships, they sank very quickly. They capsized. The Empress of Ireland, for example, even other cruise ships. It's very. There are a few wrecks that are like the Titanic, and the way the Titanic sank, upright pretty much and stable, which gave a platform for her passengers to be evacuated as safely as possible. It really is something else. It's the Titanic was such a well-built ship that if she wasn't built to this quality, there probably wouldn't have been as many survivors, because it's pretty miraculous actually that so many lifeboats were actually able to be launched. And that had to do a lot with Captain Smith, his proactive actions, trying to get the lifeboats ready, with the officers somehow, able to clear those lifeboats and whatnot, with the ship working in their favor, keeping the water at bay for as long as possible, staying relatively stable. It's really quite impressive. Tara Becker, can we rewatch this later on your channel? Yes, I will put it up on my channel. For those of you asking where this animation comes from, this is the Titanic Honor and Glory animation. They've given me permission to use this animation, so definitely huge shout out to them. 110, guys. Lifeboat number 6 is launched with 23 people on board, including Margaret Brown. So this lifeboat that's being launched, this is probably one of the most famous lifeboats of the night because it had some really high-profile characters. Margaret Brown, aka the unsinkable Molly Brown, Quartermaster Hitchens, the man at the helm, when Titanic hit the iceberg, and of course Frederick Fleet, who was the man who spotted the iceberg, right? So a lot of heavy hitters here. And soon you're going to see that as this lifeboat is being lowered, Margaret Brown calls up to the crew and says, hey, listen, we don't have enough seamen here. We only have 2 people. We only have 2 crew members. The rest of us are women. We need some help, because it was only Quartermaster Hitchens and Frederick Fleet. So she calls up, they stop the lifeboat, and it's at this point that Second Officer Lightoller, he calls out. He's like, do we have any men here that can help? Because a lot of his crew, they had already moved on to different areas. That was one of the big complaints, that a lot of the officers said that they were running out of able-bodied seamen. So at this point, the Canadian guy that I was telling you guys about earlier, Major Arthur Puchin, he steps up and he says, listen, I'm a yachtsman back in Toronto. I can handle this. Will you let me board? And then Second Officer Lightoller, he looks at him and he says, if you are sailor enough to go down this rope, then you can go. So Major Arthur Puchin, he grabs the rope and he climbs all the way down into the lifeboat, and he survives. And as I said earlier, that is the only man that Second Officer Lightoller allows into the lifeboat that night. Pretty interesting story. Here in the chat, somebody is asking me, where is Murdoch right now? So First Officer Murdoch is on the starboard side. Now at this point, he's moved aft. So he's moved toward the back of the ship, and he's now working on those 4 aft lifeboats. Lifeboat number 9, 11, 13, and 15. Now, if you guys look at that D-deck gangway door, look at how close the water is there. Look at how close that water is. And in a few minutes, you're going to see that water really starts pouring in to the ship, and it really accelerates the rate of sinking. And you're also going to see that the ship starts listing to her port side as water starts rushing into that D-deck door. Mind you, there's also other factors like water going through Scotland Road, which ran through the port side of the ship. But it will become very, very noticeable. Great question here in the chat. Melanie's asking, what would the captain be doing right now? So the captain was actually very much involved in the evacuation. From what I read in Odyssey of Glass, he stayed primarily in the port side of the ship. So he was very heavily involved with all of, what was happening with lifeboat number 4, that lifeboat that you see stuck on the promenade deck. So he stayed there and he was helping to load lifeboats. You don't see that a lot in the movie because in the movie they portray him as kind of like almost like an old senile man, confused. But the real Captain Smith was most definitely not confused. So as you guys can see, the water has now reached the door, and it is going to have a major effect on the ship very quickly, and we will see that. So 114, lifeboat number 6 stops lowering after it realized that there are not enough sailors on board. Oh, this is what I just mentioned. First class passenger Major Arthur Puchin volunteers to go as he is a yachtsman. This is the only adult male passenger allowed into a boat by Officer Lightoller. So that would be happening right now at around 1:15 a.m. Now, what is happening with the rest of the passengers? So at this point in time, people are starting to become aware that there's something going on, right? They're seeing lifeboats be launched. People are starting to become a little bit more willing to get into lifeboats because as they look out in the promenade, this is the first class promenade deck, they can clearly see that the ocean is a lot closer than it should be. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is even though some passengers noticed that Titanic was sinking, many people, stipulated that, sure, Titanic did have some damage, but they were well aware of Titanic's safety mechanisms. They were well aware, here it is, 115, water is up to Titanic's nameplate. So the passengers were well aware that Titanic was very safe. Titanic had 16 watertight compartments, and in case of an emergency, those compartments could be closed automatically, and that would contain the water. So what many people assumed had happened was that there had been some damage, water was going into the Titanic, and Titanic was just settling into the water. So even though there was a little bit of a list, they figured that Titanic was going to settle. And a lot of people mentioned that they figured that people were being put into lifeboats in order to get rid of some of the weight to help Titanic settle into the water. That's why initially many individuals, many passengers, they didn't want to volunteer to be the people to go out and be, sort of like the guinea pigs, right? So that's why even though people were trying to rationalize, there's no way that the ship could sink. Okay, it's going underwater. Yeah, it's going to settle into the water, but we're still fine. So even at 115, as the water is at Titanic's nameplate, people are still, trying to lie to themselves, trying to rationalize what's going on. Okay, so what we're about to see here, guys, is a very interesting shot because as we can see, that door on D-Deck, it is open and a lot of seawater is now just openly rushing into that door. So you're going to see very quickly the effect that has because Titanic really starts listing to port significantly. Before, Titanic had a slight list to starboard. Then she sort of evened out. But now you're going to see that Titanic starts becoming less stable because of what's happening down there and because as water starts rushing through Scotland Road, which is pretty much an open passage throughout the length of the ship, water starts going there. So a lot of weight is being put on Titanic's port side. So you're going to start seeing Titanic list. Very, very significant, actually. So what is happening at this point? There it is. 118. Titanic begins listing to port. And again, if you speed up the video, because the animation stays on this angle for a while, you will really see that tilt. It just starts. Ooh. Now, I want to point out that if you guys look on the boat deck, it still looks rather steady. It still looks pretty sturdy. It's not like super, super crazy noticeable, but people, of course, have now noticed that Titanic is listing forward and now starting to list slightly to port. But kind of, we're well into the sinking at this point, and there's still not a whole lot of panic, right? Things kind of deteriorate very quickly, all at once. But not yet. Oh, here it is. So at 1:20, as I mentioned, the majority of the engineering and stoker staff is ordered to evacuate. So up until this point, all of the stokers, the firemen down there, they had been working. They had been at their posts. And at around this time, that's pretty much when they were like, okay, get out of here, go up. So at this point, a lot of stokers, they start appearing on the boat deck, including Frederick Barrett, who does end up getting saved on lifeboat number 13. Okay, so here we see one of the first aft lifeboats being launched. So lifeboat number 16 is launched with 53 people on board. So obviously now it is 1:20 a.m. Look at the bow, guys. Look at how quickly the bow is going down. Look at the yellow line, how it's just going. It's going underneath the water. And this is in real time right now. So things are really sinking rather quickly. Titanic is losing the battle. So it's now pretty obvious that something is not quite right. So people are starting to get a little bit more willing to go onto the lifeboats, as we can see by the rising number of passengers in those lifeboats. Danny Fight asks, why is there still steam coming out of Titanic's third funnel? There's still steam coming out because you got to remember the lights are still on. All of Titanic's auxiliary power is still going on, and everything on the Titanic runs pretty much on steam. So that's why you're still seeing some of that exhaust, because Titanic, quote unquote, is not turned off completely. Oh, here in the chat, Douglas McDonough is pointing out that the door is almost completely submerged, and you're actually totally right. I can't see that right now because my phone is in the way, but yeah. If you guys take a look, the door is very much underwater now. Boiler Room 4 is forced to be abandoned. Now, Boiler Room 4 is the first boiler room that didn't have any damage whatsoever. The forward two boiler rooms did have water damage. It was Boiler Room 6 and Boiler Room 5, but Boiler Room 4 had no damage. So this is very significant that now that is being completely evacuated. So the situation is really starting to take a turn. And I want to point out, guys, look at the tilt. Look at the list to port now. It's quite obvious. And this just happened in a span of, 3-4 minutes? It's been 3-4, maybe 5 minutes that we've been at this angle. So things you're going to see everything speed up very quickly, and a lot of events are going to start happening really, really rapidly. So 1:23, Titanic lists increasingly to port, and it's going to keep on increasing to port. Titanic stays listing to port very, very significantly. So that's one of the things that James Cameron admits that he got wrong in the movie. In the movie, we see Titanic, gracefully go into the water very much evenly. But we do now know that Titanic did not stay even. And you will, the animation here from Titanic Honor and Glory, they do an incredible job showing the port side list. We can now see that water is starting to pour over the well deck. So the well deck is that little dip. So if you look on the left side, you see the crane, that whole area, that's called the forecastle. And then just aft or just behind that area, you have that little area that goes down. That's the well deck. So we can see that water is starting to pour over the port side of the well deck. Okay, so as I mentioned, things will be happening very quickly. So in the span of a couple of minutes, things are starting to get very, very crowded, and people are getting much more agitated at this point toward the back of the ship, toward the aft, because people are realizing that a lot of the lifeboats are gone. There's very few lifeboats left, and there are a lot of people still left on the ship. Third class passengers are still starting to come up now. Second class passengers, there are a lot of people and a lot of men, including all of those stokers that have just been released a few minutes ago. They're going to start coming up, and things are really going to get very crowded, and people are slowly going to start getting very, very anxious. And look at how much the bow has dipped into the water, guys. Now, throughout all of this, all of the ship's engineers, they are still at their post. This is the reason why we see lights on the Titanic. They really were heroes. They stayed at their posts. All of the electrical equipment, all that. Oh, here it is. Lifeboat number 14 is launched with 40 people aboard. So that lifeboat number 14 will be toward the back. So if I point your attention to the right side of the screen, you will see lifeboat number 14 going down. It'll be that forward lifeboat in that back grouping. So going back to the engineers. Oh, here. As we can see, Fifth Officer Lowe fires his pistol to scare off a mob of men threatening to jump into Lifeboat 14. So things are starting to fall apart now, right? There are a lot of men that are gathered at the promenade waiting to board the lifeboat. So Fifth Officer Lowe, he shoots his gun to scare them off. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of updates happening very quickly here. But as I mentioned, the engineers, they were stationed toward the stern of the ship, which is why they were able to be there for so long. So if it wasn't for them, it would have been just complete chaos and pandemonium as the lights went out. Now, going back to what we just saw here, Fifth Officer Lowe is inside of lifeboat number 14. Fifth Officer Lowe is inside of lifeboat number 14. Now, something very interesting happened there. As they were boarding lifeboat number, as they were, getting everybody aboard lifeboat number 14, it was Sixth Officer Moody and Fifth Officer Lowe that were helping out. Sixth Officer Moody would have been the person to have get into the boat because he was the lower ranking officer. But Sixth Officer Moody, for some reason, he said, no, listen, you go on ahead. He said this to Fifth Officer Lowe. I'll get the next one. So he gave his spot over to Fifth Officer Lowe, and Sixth Officer Moody was the only junior officer to not survive that night. Every other junior officer did, in fact, survive. So Fourth Officer Boxhall, Fifth Officer Lowe, they survived. Third Officer Pittman, they all survived, except Sixth Officer Moody. And he was pretty young. I think Sixth Officer Moody was like 23 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I have to check my book, but I'm not going to check it right now. Somebody can Google for me and tell me how old Sixth Officer Lowe was. So, guys, can anybody recognize what we're looking at here? Anybody in the chat? This is now D-Deck. And if you guys are familiar with D-Deck, with the Titanic, this is the first class reception and first class dining room. Water is quickly going up the ship. Look at the rate of the water moving up the columns here. Sniper Master, absolutely right. The grand staircase, the reception room column. Josie Burton, Rose getting shot at. Yeah, exactly. So in the scene where Cal is chasing Jack and Rose, it would be in this exact area that we're looking at where that would be occurring. But yeah, at this point, this looks very, very scary because the water is going up really quickly. Somebody here in the YouTube chat, Noir, is asking, why did the scene where Jack fights Lovejoy get deleted? The simple answer is for timing purposes. Basically for timing purposes. Okay. Yo, this is an amazing shot. Look at this. Look at this. We can really see the effect that the door, that open gangway door had on the Titanic. All this water is now had rushed in through the reception. That open gangway door was right where we saw that flooding. That would have been the reception, and that's where that door would have been. And again, as I mentioned, a lot of the water rushing through Scotland Road would have contributed to Titanic listing so far to the port. Oh, this is interesting. So at 1:30, lifeboat number 14, the same one where 5th Officer Lowe had shot his gun at that lifeboat, they actually have to be dropped like 4 feet because they get jammed. So they can't quite go all the way. So they just like cut it and then boom, they're dropped. So it was definitely very scary for all the passengers involved. Lifeboat 12 is launched with 42 people on board. Okay, so that boat would have been forward of lifeboat number 14. So that's on the port side. That's a lifeboat that you see over on the right-hand side. Okay, Slater says 6th Officer Moody was 24 when he died. Guys, so for me, it is 1:25 a.m. And I think here in the video, it is 1:30. So we're almost synced. At least here in my local time zone, we're almost at the exact same time zone here. 1:31. Lifeboat number 9 is launched with 40 people on board. So there was a little bit of confusion with the starboard aft lifeboats. That's why we saw that there was a lot of time between all those forward lifeboats on the starboard side and then these lifeboats being launched on the aft. Because if I remember correctly from my books, it's they were having a lot of trouble getting the crew. A lot of the crew had moved over to port. They were trying to figure out those lifeboats because obviously they had a slow start with launching their lifeboats. So when Murdoch went there, he didn't really find any crew to be able to help him with those lifeboats there. So as you've been seeing in a lot of these timestamps, there are many ships that have indeed responded to Titanic's distress signal, but unfortunately, all of them are way, way too far. At this point, the Carpathia is steaming full speed ahead. And Captain Rostron of the Carpathia, he actually, he did a fantastic job. He basically told his crew to divert all of the power away from heaters, away from unnecessary electricity, and he diverted all of that towards his engine. So he was able to make a speed of 17 knots, which was more than the Carpathia could handle. There were reports from passengers and crew on the Carpathia that they were pushing the ship so hard that the actual walls were vibrating. That's how quickly Carpathia was racing toward Titanic. And keep in mind that they were navigating through an ice field at around this point. Oh, weird. It's all so 133. Titanic is in communication with about a dozen ships. Exactly. So Titanic is communicating with a lot of people. Unfortunately, they're all much too far. Now, what you're looking at here, this is lifeboat number 9 that's being launched. And as you can see, as the bow dips into the Atlantic Ocean, the stern rises up, which makes that descent so much more precarious. It makes it so much scarier. And yeah, it definitely would have been something that the passengers would have been nervous about. That's a far descent. And the other thing to remember, guys, is that at this point, Titanic, you guys saw, is listing so far to port, so to the left side, that it's making a lot of these lifeboats on the starboard side, it's making it a little bit difficult for them to launch because they're now afraid that the lifeboats are going to start grazing against the side of the ship because they would be leaning to port as well. Okay, so we see here it's now 1:34. Things are really starting to get sort of out of control. Sailors are linking arms to prevent men from rushing the lifeboats. And as you can imagine, you see these three last lifeboats here on the starboard side. That would have been lifeboat 11, 13, and 15 that are being loaded right now. It would have been a very hectic scene right here. Okay, so here at 1:35, water begins discharging through the condensers. So if you see here in the animation, you can see that water there, right? This is about to play a really, really big role in one of the more dramatic moments of the entire evacuation, which was shown in the James Cameron film. So we will see that play out in just a few minutes. Yeah, as you can see here, the propellers are definitely well out of the water now. Okay, taking a look at the chat here on YouTube, I see Artemis says, I feel like I read something years ago about people in lifeboats worried about the ship suction pulling them down. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So that was a big concern for people, the suction of the ship. Obviously, the able-bodied seamen, the other sailors, they were very well trained in trying to clear away the ship. So that was a big priority for a lot of people, making sure that they were well away from the ship because they didn't know how the ship was going to behave. We now know the Titanic ended up being rather sturdy and stable throughout the entire sinking, but they didn't know that at the time, right? So they were very afraid that the ship was going to capsize, that the ship was all of a sudden going to pull them in. So people started rowing far, far away from the ship just to be clear of that suction. So as we can see here, 4th Officer Boxall is still firing the distress rockets, desperately trying to make contact with that ship in the distance. 1:37, Titanic's power decreases. Cape Race, Canada is now out of range of the telegraph. So as the ship's power decreases, then the range of the wireless machine, that also decreases. So that's why Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, they throughout this entire time, they were desperately trying to communicate with anybody who would listen. So here it is. Lifeboat 11 is launched with 50 people on board. So lifeboat number 11 would have been on the opposite side of the ship that we're seeing right now. This we're looking at the port side of the ship right now. So lifeboat number 11 would have been on the starboard side of the ship. You guys can see here that a lot of the lifeboats here on the port side of the ship have now been launched. So anybody remaining on the ship, it's very obvious that there are not enough lifeboats for everybody, and the ship is sinking, especially now that the whole forecastle is starting to go underwater. So the very bow of the ship, that's all going underwater. So just a quick time check for you guys. It would be approximately 1:37 a.m. at this point, which means there's really only 40 minutes left before Titanic sinks. And these 40 minutes are going to mean life and death for everybody left on board so far. Here in the chat, Julie Girl 219 asks a really good question. Did they really not let third class passengers up until the first class people went, or was that movie drama? I would say that there's definitely a little bit of movie drama. It was not so much that they were intentionally kept below. There were some locked gates that were always just locked out of protocol. It was regulation. They had to keep third class immigrants away from everybody else, just based on immigration laws at the time, just, for health reasons and whatnot. They had to be separated. So there were all these Boswick gates that were always shut, in basically separating, the different areas of the ship, but not all areas were closed off. So they weren't systematically, kept down there, but they were. So Lifeboat number 13 is launched with 55 people on board. Okay, there's about to be some drama on this lifeboat. I'm going to get back to that in just a quick second, but there's about to be drama on this lifeboat here. So were third class people intentionally kept below? No, they were not intentionally kept below, but it was a lot harder for them to get to the boat deck because of where they were on the ship, right? All of their open areas, they didn't have an easy access to the boat area, to the boat deck. The boat deck, the forward half of the boat deck was a first class area, while the aft, the back half, that was a second class area. The third class area was the poop deck, right? So in order for them to go up to the boat deck, they had to climb all these different gates and everything, but they weren't locked down like they showed in the movie. I love this shot, guys. You really, really get to see the extent of the angle, the extent of the port side list here. Here it is. Okay. Lifeboat number 11 is nearly swamped by the bilge discharge. So a few minutes ago, we saw that there was water coming out of the side of the Titanic, right? Those were the bilge pumps just getting out, it was condensers, basically getting out all of the water. And that was pretty much it was coming out right where lifeboat number 11 was being launched. So now at this point, lifeboat 11 has touched the water. Lifeboat number 13, which is the one just behind that one is being launched. And at the same time, lifeboat number 15 is being loaded. All of this is happening very quickly. There's a lot of panic on the actual boat deck, a lot of commotion. And things are about to get a little bit crazier. So Lifeboat 13 is launched with 55 people. So there we see, over on the left side of the screen, you see Lifeboat 13 being launched. And this is the lifeboat that Frederick Barrett, who was the lead fireman in Boiler Room 6, he was in this lifeboat. He was assigned to this lifeboat to help out as an able-bodied seaman. And now we're about to see some drama unfold right now. Okay? So I want to point you guys, your guys' attention to that bilge. See the water discharge? So as lifeboat number 13 touches the water, all of that discharge is going to push this lifeboat number 13 back, right? So it's going to push the boat back, and very shortly, we're going to see what happens. Mandy, thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate it. How's it going? It's going great. I'm so glad you guys are here with me, staying up. It's 1:37 a.m. where I am right now. So I'm very happy to be doing this with you guys. I love our community, and I'm glad to be able to chat with you guys about this. Thank you for the super chat. Okay, so here Lifeboat 13 is about to touch down, and the boat is going to be pushed aft because of that water. There it is. So at 1:44, Lifeboat 13 is abruptly pushed aft by the force of the bilge discharge, jamming it on the falls. So they're having a lot of trouble dealing with this water coming out there. And keep in mind, this boat is pretty full. I believe there were 55 people on board this boat. It was nearly full. So that water is now pushing that lifeboat number 13 back. And at the same time, Lifeboat number 15 is launched with 68 people. This boat is overflowing with people. Keep in mind, guys, that the regulation capacity for these lifeboats is 65 people. So at this point, this boat is overflowing, right? And as you see here, the boat obviously was launched because it's now becoming a desperate attempt to get as many lifeboats launched because the ship is going down quickly. And as we see here, Lifeboat 15 is being lowered right on top of Lifeboat number 13. 145. Lifeboat 13 cannot release itself as Lifeboat 15 comes down on top of it. So at this point, people are screaming. In Lifeboat number 13, they're screaming. In Lifeboat number 15, they're calling up desperately, pleading with the officers, with the sailors to stop. Stop lowering, stop lowering. But there's so much happening on the boat deck, they can't hear. And at the very last second, they're able to cut the ropes and move right out of the way as Lifeboat 15 touches the water. Super, super close call. Yo, Loco Lightning with the super chat. Hi from Australia. I watched this video myself, and from my point of view, it finished and the ship was on the ocean floor. Now I'm watching your stream. I appreciate you, man. That's awesome. I'm glad you're joining us. Thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate you. Okay, so now that drama has played out. But now people are coming to a very scary realization that pretty much all the boats on the starboard side, they're gone. So now people are really coming face to face with their fate. What are they going to do? A lot of people on the aft part of the ship, they can't see that there's one last lifeboat there. What we're looking at there, that's collapsible sea. In the timestamp, we just saw that Benjamin Guggenheim, he's with his manservant. And he's like, we're dressing our best. We're prepared to go down as gentlemen. So do you guys remember this lifeboat here? Lifeboat number 4. That this is one of the first lifeboats sort of moved down. This was gonna be the first lifeboat launched on the port side, but they ran into the problem that they didn't have the keys to open the A-deck promenade windows. They finally were able to find the little crank to open up that window, and they start loading passengers in here. And there's one really important passenger that is saved on this lifeboat, and that is Madeline Astor, John Jacob Astor's 18-year-old pregnant wife. So John Jacob Astor, for those that don't know, he was the richest man on board, very famous. You can think about it, he's like the Jeff Bezos of the day, the Elon Musk of the day. So he would have been very well recognized. People knew who he was. And he was traveling with his 18-year-old pregnant wife. So at this point, they're loading this lifeboat. He helps to get Madeline into lifeboat number 4. And then he asks Second Officer Lightoller, may I join my wife? She is expecting. And he says, no, sir, not at this time. So he says, okay. And he backs away. And he says goodbye to Madeline. And that's the last time they see each other. 149, the RMS Olympic Titanic sister ship confirms that they are coming. She is around 500 miles away. So look at the water, guys. If you look on the left side of the screen, things are really, the ocean is really coming up rather quickly. The 149, the orchestra reassembles on the boat deck outside the grand staircase. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't actually believe that the orchestra ever played out on the boat deck. In a lot of our Titanic books, it's generally believed that it would have made more sense for the orchestra to play just inside of that first class entrance, which would be the first class entrance would be right. If you see the last set of davits on the right hand side, you can see where the grand staircase is, that grate at the top. So the first class entrance would have been just to the right of that, just in front of that second funnel. Inside those doors, that's where, that is where the orchestra most likely would have been playing. Titanic's power decreases. The Olympic and the Mount Temple are now out of range. There it is. Finally at 150, lifeboat number 4 is launched with 30 people on board. So after, what has it been? It's been more than an hour. It's been more than an hour that lifeboat has been there in that position, and they finally got it loaded and they finally got it launched. That is a boat that Madeline Astor survives in. And at the same time, lifeboat number 10 is launched with 57 people on board, and I believe that is the last lifeboat on the port side of the ship. Of course, not counting collapsible D, which is still up here forward. Yeah, so that is the last regular lifeboat to be launched then. So there's a question here in the chat. Did the wife inherit his money? No, I don't believe Madeline Astor inherited the money because she would only get the money if she did not remarry, and she pretty much remarried very quickly after. So she did not inherit the money. 152, Titanic's power decreases. The SS Ipiranga is out of range from the telegraph. Okay, so at this point, there is less than half an hour left of Titanic's life. Oh, there's that piano that I was talking about, by the way. So this is a shot of the grand staircase. We can now see that the water seems to be coming up on C deck really quickly. And at this point, a lot of people are also gathering here on the stern of the ship. This is the poop deck, because they can see that there are no lifeboats left. So they may as well go to this area of the ship where they seemingly seems a little bit safer. And what you'll notice is that for the remainder of the sinking, Titanic stays with that port side list. That list remains. Here in the YouTube chat, Becklin Cornelison is asking me about the abandoned Pennsylvania mansion. I do know about that. Yeah, somebody tagged me in a TikTok, and then I made a TikTok about that. It's true. There is an abandoned Titanic mansion. I believe it belonged to the Widener family, actually. So take a look at the ship now. You can hear in the audio, Titanic Honor and Glory did such an amazing job with this. You really get a sense as to everything. That's Titanic struggling. That's her groans struggling to stay afloat for her passengers. 154, Lifeboat 4 rows for the open gangway door but cannot find it as it is already underwater. So Lifeboat 4 was that last lifeboat that was loaded on the promenade. I guess the original instructions were to head to the open gangway door, which we saw, 40 minutes ago? It's well underwater. They obviously can't find it because it's gone. (155) Titanic's power decreases. The Carpathia is now out of range of the telegraph. So, at this point, what is happening? It is almost 2 a.m., and there are only 4 lifeboats left on the ship, guys. And these are all the collapsible lifeboats. So there are 2 that are on the boat deck level, and there are 2 that are stored above the officers' quarters. Now, to be honest with you guys, nobody really thought of a good system to get it, for getting them down, right? There wasn't any. Oh, here's Captain Smith gives the 2 telegrapher operators permission to abandon their posts and save themselves. They choose to stay longer despite transmissions failing. So yes, Harold Bride and Jack Phillips, they stay at their post until pretty much as long as they can, until the water is pretty much washing on shore. But Captain Smith has now relieved them of their duties. But going back to the other collapsible lifeboats, these 2 collapsible lifeboats, collapsible A and collapsible B, there is no way really for them to be easily brought down to the boat deck level. So what people do, they end up improvising. They put oars under there. You see that in the movie as well. It's kind of a haphazard job. They're just like, But at this point, the crew is now getting collapsible C on the starboard side and collapsible D on the port side. They're getting them all hooked up to the falls and everything, to the davits. And they're going to be loading them and trying to get them launched as quickly as possible, because at this point, obviously, there's not much time left for Titanic. And everybody at this point is very much aware that Titanic is going down. In fact, many people at this point have lost hope, and they're moving toward the stern of the ship. People are praying. People are throwing deck chairs. And this is a good time to talk about Charles Jugan, which you guys probably know as the drunk baker. So when the ship started sinking, he basically, started drinking. He was drinking some whiskey, same thing that I'm drinking here, but he just pretty much, he really started going at it. But at the same time, he was helping with the evacuation efforts. Charles Jugan, the baker, he helped women get into lifeboats throughout the night. And at around this point, he would have been on the A-deck promenade throwing deck chairs overboard in order to give people something to cling on to when they eventually would hit the water, which everybody is now realizing it's going to be coming sooner rather than later. So Charles Jugan at this point, he would have been throwing deck chairs. Many other individuals were throwing deck chairs and throwing other objects. Here's another timestamp, guys. 1:59. Andrew, Smith, and Wilde make a desperate attempt using the captain's megaphone to call back the half-full lifeboats to the ship to pick up more passengers. So there's actually a deleted scene in the movie Titanic where they show this scene right here, where it was basically Captain Smith. You see Captain Smith, Thomas Andrews, and Chief Officer Wilde calling on the megaphone for some, those nearby lifeboats to come back and pick up more passengers. They do not end up listening. So it is now 1:59, almost 2 a.m., and Collapsible B is now is about to be launched, and this is the lifeboat that Bruce Ismay, which we see in the movie, he was the managing director of the White Star Line. This is the lifeboat that he is saved in, which obviously caused a lot of hardships for him later on in life. So it is now 2 a.m. As the timestamp says, there are only 20 minutes left. 20 minutes left. And look, a lot of the ship is still, is still there, but you will see that the final plunge, it just goes down. There's a moment where Titanic just can no longer hold the water at bay, and things happen very quickly. After 2:05, in around 5 minutes, you're going to see things very quickly deteriorate. So 2 a.m., Collapsible C is launched with 43 people on board. It scrapes the side of the ship the whole way down. This is because, obviously, the ship is listing so far to port that it's now the lifeboat is leaning against the side of the ship. So there's only 20 minutes left until Titanic is fully gone. And you can see here in the animation, we see some of the lifeboats in the background. As Collapsible C is loading, anybody around there, they're now trying to figure out, okay, how can we get this collapsible boat on top of the officer's quarter? How are we going to get that down? As I mentioned earlier, there's no real system in place to easily get those lifeboats down. I don't think anyone really even thought that they would ever be used, right? They were just putting them there so they could say, hey, listen, we have another 2 extra collapsible lifeboats for safety. But it's not a very practical way of storing lifeboats. The crew begins working on the final 2 collapsible boats on the roof of the officer's quarters. So this is Collapsible B that you see here. This lifeboat ends up being overturned. And then the other one on the starboard side, that's Collapsible A. That one ends up being half swamped. So this last lifeboat that you see on the left side of your screen, that is Collapsible D. And this lifeboat is going to be the last lifeboat that is officially launched. This is, and in the movie Titanic, actually, this is the lifeboat that Rose jumps out of. She jumps out of the last lifeboat, and it's this one here, Collapsible D. And you can see that there's a last desperate attempt of trying to get this lifeboat launched, because look at the water. The water is now coming up onto the A-deck promenade, and the ship is sinking so incredibly quickly. This is also the lifeboat where the Navratil brothers are saved. So if you guys are unfamiliar with the Titanic orphan story, long story short, there was a father. He took his children away from the mother. They lived in France. They were going through, they were separated. Anyway, he took the children. He was bringing them to America. He comes on board, he comes onto the boat deck, and he hands his children off to the officers. Obviously, he's not allowed to board, but he puts his children into Collapsible D. This is the last lifeboat to be launched, and it is about to be launched at 2:05. So it's going to happen any minute now. Yeah, we got here a comment on YouTube saying Herodotus, Michel Navratil is one of the last 5 Titanic survivors and the last male survivor. You're absolutely correct. Yeah, I want to say that Michel passed away in 2001. I made a video, I made a TikTok about him and a YouTube video not too long ago, and I want to say he passed away in 2001. Somebody can fact check me. So things are really, really starting to accelerate at this point. Just keep your eye on the left side of the screen and look at how quickly that water is going to be coming up. There it is. So at 2:05, Collapsible D is the last boat to be launched. And now at this point, people are really turning their attention to those last two boats that are on top of the officers' quarters. They're trying to figure out like how to get them down at this point. But as you will soon see, they will run out of time because the water is just creeping up. Becklin here on YouTube is asking, are there any Titanic survivors still alive? No, unfortunately, the last Titanic survivor, Milvina Dean, she passed away on May 31st, 2009. So we're going to see the water creep up very, very quickly here. And within a matter of a few minutes, actually, Titanic is going to begin her final plunge. So you can see they're really racing against time. Those two collapsible boats, they're still on top of the officers' quarters. They're fumbling around, trying to figure out how to get the boats down. And they're having a tough time. There's people around there. They're trying to control the crowds. They're trying to figure out a way on the fly to bring these boats down. And they still have to get them set up. Right, in their heads, they're thinking, okay, we need to attach the falls, then we need to make sure that they're attached to the davits, and then we have to load people in there. They're really, really running out of time. It is now 2:07, and yeah, all hopes of calling back any other lifeboats, they're now gone. Look at the list, guys. The port side list is very, very significant. So we have less than 15 minutes left in Titanic's life. You can see that the lights, the power, they've decreased significantly. Lots of creaking. There'd be lots of activity at this point. People are running around. Stuff is being thrown overboard. It's becoming their inevitable reality that they will be facing the frigid waters of the North Atlantic very, very soon. There's absolutely no doubt in people's minds at this point. Pretty much no lifeboats left. And they can feel the ship going. Last messages are heard from the Titanic. They are unintelligible. Yeah, the power at this point is so weak that no messages are heard after this point. Now, this right here is probably one of my favorite tidbits of the night. We're going to see here that on the starboard side, First Officer Murdoch is desperately trying to get that last lifeboat prepared, hooked up, loaded, and launched. And you're about to see very shortly that he's going to get his crew to crank those first davits, to crank that davit into the inward position to try to get Collapsible A hooked up. And the beautiful thing about that, in my opinion, is that if you go down to the wreck today, you still see that very first davit. It's moving. I think you can see it moving now. It's being cranked up. That very first davit on the right side is being cranked inward to try to get that boat hooked up. And in the wreck today, you still see that davit in that inward position. And I think it was said in Ghosts of the Abyss, it was a documentary from 2002, they said it perfectly. It was really, it really stands as a testament, as a monument to Murdoch's commitment and his bravery that night, that he really did everything in his power up until the very last second. And that symbolizes, you know, his actions that night. You still see that in the wreck today. So as you can see, guys, things are really starting to fall apart now. The water is going over onto the boat deck. And the water is creeping up here, up the grand staircase very rapidly. People are really panicking at this point. Things are about to... Titanic really only has 10 minutes left of life. And in these 10 minutes, everything happens super quickly. So the water is now going to be rushing over the bridge, and many passengers report that it was so intense that it was really like a wave that was being washed over. Look at Collapsible B, it's still on top of the officers' quarters. They're desperately trying to bring this boat down. Collapsible B is thrown from the roof of the officers' quarters, and it lands upside down, and it stays pretty much upside down. It says it lands on top of Harold Bride. I'm not sure if it actually lands on top of him, but I do know that Harold Bride ends up near the collapsible, and he does get saved from the collapsible. So at this point, it's pretty much every man for himself. The water is rushing over. You can't see it in this particular animation, but the water would be really cascading over, because at this point, this is now Titanic's final plunge. Look, the bridge is now underwater. If we go around to the starboard side of the ship, this is the wheelhouse, guys. This, over on the right side, that is where Quartermaster Hitchens was a mere 2 hours ago, trying to evade the iceberg that would eventually result in this. The water is... there's no stopping it at this point. And for those on the starboard side, there is that davit that I was talking about. That davit in that cranked in position, which is still there on the wreck today. But they clearly just ran out of time. There were people that were being loaded on here, and eventually this boat and the other boat, Collapsible D, they get washed off, and Collapsible A stays upright, but it's half swamped. Survivors distinctly hear 4 explosions from deep within the ship as her plunge begins. Now, here we go. Things happen very quickly now. So people at this point are now cramming into Collapsible A. Others are now running to the stern of the ship. They feel the water, they feel the Titanic leaving them from underneath their feet. There's chaos, panic, and very shortly we are going to see that funnel is going to collapse, crushing many individuals. And many will later speculate that John Jacob Astor is actually crushed by one of these funnels. Now keep in mind, Titanic is going to be fully submerged in just a matter of minutes. And we can see Collapsible A just drifting off. And we are now also going to be seeing Collapsible B on the port side. People are clamoring on top of the Collapsible B. That area, that lit up area just in front of the second funnel, that is now the grand staircase. So it would be, within a matter of seconds, the water would be overtaking the grand staircase and water would be pouring through, as we see in James Cameron's Titanic. So look, this is already at the second smokestack. This is already at the second funnel. So keep in mind, guys, that this would have been happening 110 years ago today, at around this time. Our time is a little bit off. I think really it would have been happening probably an hour ago. But at approximately this time, 110 years ago, this is exactly what would have been happening in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the North Atlantic. There are now 1,500 people still left on board the ship. And unfortunately, the majority of them will not make it through the night. These are their last moments, really, of life. Now, one thing that you will notice is you can hear the creaks. You can hear a lot of the stress on the ship as the ship is being pulled down. It's being stressed beyond what it was designed to withhold. And there was a natural weak area right in front of the second funnel. Right in front of the third funnel. So if you look in front of the third funnel, there was almost like a little vent. And that vent goes all the way down the ship. So that was a natural weak point. So in a few seconds, you are going to see that Titanic splits right in front of that third funnel. The one that's still intact. Because in the movie they show Titanic splitting between the third and the fourth funnel, but we now know that it's split right in front of the third funnel. The other important thing to point out is the actual angle of the ship, of Titanic, before she split. It was definitely not as high as they showed it in the movie. And even James Cameron admitted this in some of his recent documentaries. And there was a Titanic documentary called Titanic 20 Years Later on Disney+. He goes back and he realizes, okay, the angle at which we got it, that was not correct. So it was much less steep as they show in the movies, but you will see very shortly Titanic will break in half. And as soon as Titanic breaks in half, it's over within a matter of seconds. Very quickly. Ladies and gents, we are looking at Titanic's final moments. This would have been happening 110 years ago today, at around this point. There are approximately 1,500 people still on board the ship. And there it is, guys. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912, Titanic sank. So this was the Titanic Honor and Glory animation. I want to give a huge, huge thanks to the Titanic Honor and Glory team for letting me use their animations so I could, have this experience with you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Thank you on TikTok. I know you guys are there. I haven't forgotten about you. Thank you so much on YouTube. Your comments have been incredible. This has been a really amazing experience to do with you guys. And it's amazing to think that it's 110 years. Everything that we just experienced, we experienced this together, Titanic colliding with the iceberg, and we saw everything happen. Very quickly, people's lives changed. So thank you for taking this journey with me and just for sticking with me. For those of you that sent super chats and everything, I really appreciate you. Noir, thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you for watching my content. I really appreciate that. Burning Paradise, thank you so much for that very generous super chat. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for an awesome commentary. Thank you so much. Every single one of you guys in the comments, thank you. That was this was actually my first real YouTube live, and I'm really happy that I got to experience it with you guys. Thank you guys on TikTok. I think we should all probably go to bed now because it's been quite a night. So once again, huge shout out to Titanic Honor and Glory for letting me use this animation. If you guys want to explore the Titanic, you can feel free to download their demo. It's absolutely free on their website, www.titanichg.com. Definitely go check it out. Check out their page, Titanic Honor and Glory. I'm a big supporter of the project. Thank you, TikTok. Thank you, YouTube. I'm going to go give my voice a rest and get a good night's sleep because it's been almost 2.5 hours. But I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. I'll see you guys real soon.